Happy Valentine's Day. Let's talk about why love doesn't exist. I thought about some things I could do. I was like, do I like any romantic comedies? And I don't. And I was like, do I have any other romance books that I like that I could cover? And I was like, no, I've literally done all of those in the last couple of years. One thing that is a real guilty pleasure of mine is like reality TV. I used to really like America's Next Top Model for no particular reason. And one thing that all the cool YouTubers have been talking about at the minute is this show Love is Blind, right? The third season is out at the minute, and it was meant to be like the most dramatic one that they've ever had. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna watch the third season of this series and see what it's all about, right? And it was chaotic, and then I ended up watching the other two seasons as well. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk about some of the philosophies about love that I, you know, postulated or whatever the fuck. The show's premise, in case you've been living under a rock for the past few years, is that these contestants come in and they do speed dating, but they don't see each other. They talk through a speaker in the wall. That's the whole idea of Love is Blind, right? Is that eventually when they do meet, it won't matter what they look like because they've made this connection of souls. Right, let's go off on our first tangent here and talk about the meaning behind the phrase love is blind, a phrase coined by Shakespeare and popularized by Tommy Wiseau in The Room. When I first briefly looked this up, I'm not going to say I did any like mad research for this video or anything, but I did look up where the phrase came from. Suspected it would be our boy Shakespeare, but I was expecting, you know, with kind of the way that Romeo and Juliet is, where they see each other and that's love at first sight, and now in a modern society we view love with a more like this more adult lens where it's like that wasn't real love because they hadn't even formed a connection yet. It was obviously just lust because they liked the way each other looked. I was expecting Love is Blind to mean that, like, sometimes people are so good looking that you don't realise they're a bad person. That just seemed like the kind of vibe that would be going down in these Shakespearean times, okay? And I'm sorry for judging because actually, Willie S., you know, he knew exactly what he was talking about. It was, I think, the first reference that he made this phrase in was like one of his characters was dressed as a boy and she didn't want her boyfriend to see her because she would like look ugly, and it like didn't matter and he didn't care that she looked like a boy because he was already in love with her, and so, you know, it didn't matter what she looked like on occasion, you know. So Shakespeare was along the right lines here, okay, and the show does go along with this premise. You know, it shouldn't matter what the person looks like. I think that in a more modern context, the phrase love is blind has come to mean something entirely different, and that's that once you have formed this love connection with someone, once you love someone, oftentimes we can overlook the negative things about them or like the red flags or the changes that aren't so good because we view them in this rose-tinted light, okay? The show does not give its contestants time to form these attachments. It doesn't give them very long. I think they date in the pods for like 2 weeks and then they have to like propose to someone or they're not on the show anymore. So they do kind of speed run the relationship a little bit, which doesn't seem to allow for a lot of time for an emotional connection to be made. But according to the people who have been through this experiment, as they like to call it, you do form a weirdly strong connection in these pods. And as someone who has never experienced this, I'm not going to try and speak to that. Okay, and we'll get into that a little bit more later and the implications of this later, I assure you. But for now, I'm just trying to get through the intro. For the sake of this video not being too long, I am only going to focus on the key players from each season that I feel like I have something worthwhile to talk about. We're gonna get into season 1. So the main players of season 1, we'll start with Jessica. We are Jessica apologists on this channel, okay? I'm not going to say that Jess doesn't do anything wrong over the course of what I'm about to tell you. However, I feel like she became like the villain of this season in a lot of people's eyes, and I feel like that was kind of unjust, and we're going to talk about why that is. For now, just know that Jessica is very much a stereotypical valley girl. She's almost a bit of like a yummy mummy type on this season. She's very much like she takes care of herself physically, and you can tell that she as much as she might not like to admit it, she does kind of see herself getting with this like maybe like rich, successful, good looking guy, and that's not like a bad thing to see yourself with a guy like that. It's just not necessarily something that you're going to be getting if you come on a show like Love is Blind. And as we'll see, this does not work out very well for our Jessica. The next person I will introduce is Mark, who is, I don't really have a lot to say about him. He always looks like he's like coked up for some reason, and just seems like a really like passionate individual, but we do see that he can be a little bit competitive and a little bit jealous when it comes to the other men, and that'll come into play a lot later, so look out for that. Next, I will introduce you to Barnett. I like Barnett on like a personable level, but I think when we're watching a dating show, it kind of skews our perception of people a little bit, in that we think, would we like to date this person? Would we like to be in this romantic situation with this person? And so it can make us feel a little bit more passionately either way towards these people. In Barnett's case, as much as I feel like he would be fun to sit down and have a drink with, in the context of a romantic situation, I would never go near him. Just seems like he enjoys female attention. When he first came on the show, he didn't really feel like he belonged there. It felt like he was there to just kind of date and play the field, and he wasn't really taking it too seriously. And when you're on a show where the end goal is marriage, that's not really a good mindset to be in. So we took Barnett with a pinch of salt, is what I will say. The last person that I will introduce is Amber. Amber is a girl that Barnett is speaking to in the pods. I've seen people saying she had like pick me energy, and I really do feel that. A lot of the things she said came off as very like egotistical, but I think the way that it came off to me was that Amber is very insecure, and so to combat this, she puts on this big air of fake confidence. And as the series goes on, we'll see that this air of fake confidence definitely works for Amber, if that is what she is doing. I may as well give a quick disclaimer now as well, to say that obviously this is a reality show and it's been edited, and the way that people are portrayed has been skewed, and so all of this is my opinion based on what has been shown to us, the audience, obviously. So I'm not going to have to say that for the rest of the video now, because you and I, we have an understanding, right? I immediately love geometry going on with all of these guys. Jessica is talking to both Mark and Barnett is talking to Jess and Amber, and also this other girl who's entirely irrelevant, no offense to her, but as far as my plotline goes, nah. The way that the show is set up is that the girls and boys obviously can't see each other, but they live with the rest of their respective gender, and they get to, you know, talk about the dates that they've been on and compare favorites and stuff like that. And so Mark and Barnett are living in these very close quarters, both being interested in the same girl. It's very obvious that Mark is like jealous of Barnett, and I don't know whether it's just because he's having this flirtatious relationship with a woman that Mark is also having a flirtatious relationship with, or because, you know, also Barnett is getting attention from two other girls, and so Barnett has options and Mark doesn't really. Probably feels to Mark like Barnett is like hogging all the women, essentially, and it's like, okay, well, I've got my one woman, you've got two other options, like let her go, dude. Jess is really interested in Barnett, so it's not Barnett's fault that they're in this like love triangle situation. Anyway, I think that Mark sees Jessica leaning toward Barnett, and he goes into this date with her in the pods with the intention of like making her change her mind and like swaying her towards him. And so he like love bombs her in a way. Like he goes in there with the intention of making her like him best, and we don't know like how far he was willing to go and what he was willing to say to get to that conclusion, you know what I mean? The whole thing just smacks of like desperation and disingenuity, okay? This whole situation that I'm about to describe, not just Mark. So we see that the competitiveness with the boys kind of like pushed Mark into this place where he was like, I am gonna claim Jessica for myself. And like he didn't outright try and make her make any commitments, which was nice of him, but he did kind of like state his place. And Jessica come out of this date and she was all like, you know, really happy about it, and Mark could tell, and so we went back and reported to the boys, and obviously Barnett heard about it. I think that then Barnett in turn got jealous, because Barnett turns around and starts acting in a way that I don't think he normally would have if the situation were different. He sees that Mark is all of a sudden really confident about Jess, and so he goes into a date with Jess, Barnett does, and he starts to love bomb her as well and starts to say things that I don't think he would have normally said. And one of these things that he says is that he would marry her tomorrow. Now, later on in the series, Barnett tries to claim that this was like a jokey comment and that he never meant it in a serious context. And I think that on any other show, I probably could have accepted that as like a viable answer. However, you're on the show Love is Blind, Barnett, and this is a show where the end goal is marriage. These women that you were speaking to are expecting you to propose or to break up with them, and so to even bring up the idea of marriage with them, never mind saying, I would marry you tomorrow, it's very much got a different contextualization to if you were in like a normal everyday situation or even on another dating show, at least in my opinion. And I think that Jess kind of got vilified for taking this comment so seriously, but like Jess came on this show to get married, and for her to receive an offer like this, at least in her mind, there's a very serious thing, and I can see where she's coming from. Right after saying this, Barnett like issues an ultimatum to Jess where he's like, listen, if you want me to believe that you're serious, then you're gonna have to break it off with anybody else that you're speaking to, of course, meaning Mark. So let's think about this from Jessica's point of view. Barnett says, I would marry you tomorrow. And then he issues an ultimatum where he says, get rid of the other guys so I know you're serious. Can we really blame Jessica for, in her mind, thinking that this meant if you get rid of Mark, I will propose to you tomorrow? Can we? Can we? I think that Jessica just got like really played by Barnett here. I can't deny this to you. I think that that's what happened. I don't know if Barnett like particularly liked Jessica or not. I wouldn't like to speak to that. Or whether maybe he just maybe liked the fact that he was a bit of a playboy in the pods and that he had loads of women on the go. And he didn't like the fact that Jess had another guy on the scene. He didn't like the fact that he wasn't everybody's number one, that he didn't have the full capacity of the options that he thought he did, right? And so that jealousy and that insecurity that Barnett felt led him into saying these things that he wouldn't normally say in order to win Jessica over. And I can't say, you know, how much of that was intentional, but it definitely happened. The way Jessica's obviously chuffed and she thinks she's gonna have like a fiance by this time tomorrow, and she goes and makes a date with Mark and breaks it off with him. Mark's like, what the fuck? Mark's obviously very upset. Then when Jessica goes back to Barnett and asks him, does he still feel the same way? He responds, I don't know. Basically tries to backtrack on everything he said yesterday and says that he's still, you know, got these things going on with these two other girls. He doesn't know what he wants. And, you know, Jessica's really upset by this. She says, I don't fuck with guys like you. She's got this impression that he's just been stringing her along this whole time. And I'd probably feel the same way. Even if he hadn't made the marry you tomorrow comments, he made her break things off with another guy to show that she was serious, but then he's not willing to break it off with these other two girls. And in fact, he doesn't even really know if he wants to be with Jessica in the first place. He just completely just admitted in that moment that the things he said the day before were only as a means to get Mark out of the picture and to have Jess all to himself, even though she was maybe not what he really wanted. The Barnett's behaviour later in the series made people forgive him for this initial error, and I think that Jess's behaviour later in the series definitely didn't help her to become the most liked person and, you know, for people to take her side in this situation. I think that people do forget that Barnett did basically tell Jess he was going to ask her to marry him and then take it back and say that it was a joke on a show where, you know, the aim is to get married. So anyway, Jess storms out. She's really mad. She's done with Barnett. And Barnett ends up choosing Amber. It's interesting that Barnett ended up choosing Amber, and one of the reasons he stated he chose her was because she was so confident that all the way through, like, she wouldn't allow herself to think that Barnett was going to choose any of these other girls. Or, I mean, like, she probably did think it, but, like, out loud, she would, like, fake that she knew she was the only option and that he'd be stupid not to choose her. you know, so that if he didn't choose her in the end, she could turn around and say, well, he's an idiot and I'm not bothered. Do you know what I mean? She was like setting herself up for that rejection by doing that. And it's that attracted Barnett to her in the end. And he genuinely thinks this girl is confident. Like, that's one of the things he said attracted him to her the most. I don't know whether it's obvious to me as another female, but like Amber does not scream confidence to me. She's giving insecurity, and I don't mean it in a bad way, I just mean it in an observational way. So Jess sets up a date with Mark, and she basically grovels and apologizes and, you know, begs him for a second chance. And this is the first instance we see of these internal narratives that we tell ourselves about love that kind of end up getting in the way of us having real love. Right, this is in the time between having her argument with Barnett and seeing Mark, Jess has spun herself this narrative where Barnett was this fuckboy who blinded her to the real connection that she had with Mark before. And so if she can only convince Mark to give her a second chance, then it'll still be this big love story that she envisioned for herself when she came on the show. Right? Because everyone who came on the show was expecting it to be this big romantic experience, especially in the first season when everybody seems so genuine about it, right? Mark's obviously spun himself a similar story because he agrees to take Jessica back and they get engaged. Maybe Mark as well thought that because they'd had this like big kerfuffle early on that Jessica would be so contrite about it for the rest of their relationship that they couldn't possibly have any more problems, but boy was he fucking wrong. I don't know, maybe he thought that like she'd seen the error of her ways and that she'd like finally accepted that he was the man for her and they were going to live happily ever after. And so, you know, having that one distraction from Barnett early on had like kind of guaranteed them for the future in a way. You see, I'm not saying that they did in any way have these internal narratives, but it's interesting to kind of try and unwrap the mental gymnastics that were going on in order for them to end up back together after such a fucking shit show of an early relationship. A lot of it is probably also like the pressure of the show. Like, you know, you're not going to be on the show anymore if you don't get engaged. So if you've really come on the show to try and find someone to marry, then not being on the show anymore might mean in their heads that they're a failure and they're never going to get married. I don't know. Especially because, oh my God, like, so the whole premise of the show, right, is that someone's going to like fall in love with you for who you are, not how you look. So, like, imagine going on that show and finding nobody who sees value in who you are. Like, imagine that. That's actually pretty bleak now that I think about it. Anyway, the couples, after they've proposed, get to see each other for the first time. And in this season, you know, everything goes okay and everybody seems to be attracted to each other from the off. Then they take the couples and they send them on a holiday to spend some time one-on-one and get to turn the emotional connection into a physical one, as the show puts it. I'm going to go on a quick tangent here and talk about two contestants that I have not spoken about yet, and that is Diamond and Carlton. Carlton revealed to us, the audience, early on that he had been with men in past relationships, but this was not something he decided to reveal to Diamond before proposing to her. And so when they get to the honeymoon stage, I think that Carlton starts to mentally prepare for the worst, okay? Because he knows he's going to have to tell Diamond eventually about this, you know, big part of his past and his presence, as we're to assume that this is his sexuality and it's ongoing, right? I think Carlton is really scared of rejection. I think that a lot of us, like, saw this scene and thought that being bisexual or whatever wasn't such a big deal. But I guess we're kind of not the ones to decide that, right? It was clearly a big deal to Carlton because he started to act out and act like a dick towards Diamond for seemingly no reason. Like, Diamond had no indication of why the relationship was suddenly going so wrong and why his attitude was so different than it had been in the pods, right? It was just Carlton mentally preparing for her rejection, like picking holes in the relationship, acting like a dick to try and like cause arguments so that if she did reject him, then he could turn around and say, oh, well, the relationship wasn't that good anyway because we were already fighting about other stuff. When he does eventually reveal his truth to her, it doesn't go very well, but I think a lot of it really had to do with Carlton's attitude coming into it. He came in really aggressive, and as he was explaining to her, he was in the middle of a sentence and he just stopped speaking and he was like, you're so dead behind the eyes right now. And it's like, dude, you're like telling her stuff, like she's listening to you. She's not like a fucking pod person. She needs a minute to process things, okay? The way that he kind of came out of the situation, I think, made Diamond get defensive too, and then the whole thing just kind of spiraled into this big argument. Kind of polarized audiences in a way, because some people think that Diamond was in the wrong for, you know, retaliating in this way when it was clearly such a sensitive subject for him, whereas other people think that Carlton was in the wrong for, you know, just generally acting like a dick instead of just coming out and saying it, and also for not revealing the information of his sexuality earlier, for example, in the pods. But obviously it is your choice whether you reveal your sexuality to people, but it is also an important thing to know about your partners. So you are going to have to reveal that to her at some point, and considering that you're going to get engaged in the pods, you definitely need to reveal it at some point. I think that in a normal relationship that was going on at like a normal time rate, you would probably reveal that information to them before you got engaged, right? Because that is something, like, if they reacted badly to that, they're not someone that you want to get engaged to anyway. So revealing that after the engagement, or even worse, after the marriage, would just be a bad move for everybody involved, right? But my interpretation of why Carlton waited so long to tell Diamond was maybe that he thought that if somebody could fall in love with him without seeing him, this like really crazy, insane concept to most of us, then maybe they could fall in love with him without knowing this part of his identity, which is not in keeping with the show at all, because this is like, you're supposed to be falling in love with someone's personality, and as people's sexuality is usually such a big part of their identity and who they are, I don't think that you could truly love another person unless you knew that information about them, right? At least not fully. But obviously, if you do love that person, their sexuality shouldn't matter in the end. And I think that's why this was such a polarizing argument, because without going into these people's brains and understanding exactly how they reacted to the situation, it's impossible to know whether they were coming from a place of bigotry or what. So I don't think that the way Diamond reacted was abrasive at all. I think that she did try to be supportive, and then the way that Carlton was coming at her all aggressively made her respond aggressively too, and the pair of them ended up saying a lot of things that they didn't mean. And so the relationship fell apart before the end of the honeymoon stage, which was lovely. Okay, to get back into the story of our main couples, right? I don't personally think that Jessica was attracted to Mark from the off. I don't think he was necessarily, I'm not saying he's an unattractive guy, but I don't think he was necessarily Jessica's type or the type of man that she was looking for when she came onto the show. Jess chose not to reveal this because she, you know, well, nobody wants to admit that they're shallow, right? I mean, we all are, but nobody wants to admit it. I think that, you know, Jess is like genuinely a good person. Jess genuinely believed that if she were to continue this relationship with Mark, that the physical aspect would genuinely disappear and that it wouldn't matter to her anymore what he looked like. And possibly she was right. But unfortunately, they also got to meet the other couples, and that meant she got to meet Barnett. Unfortunately, Barnett, being exactly the type of man she came to find, exactly her type, it skewed things a lot for her, because she did have this connection with Barnett in the pods. And if you were turning up to find your true love, and there was a guy that you had a connection with but weren't physically attracted to, and a guy that you did have a connection with and also were physically attracted to, which one would you be more likely to believe was the one at the end of the day? We're fed so much bullshit about what the one is, right? We're supposed to be attracted to them on every level: physical, mental, sexual, whatever, I don't know. And so obviously, upon seeing Barnett and knowing that they had this connection in the pods and that it could have been him, Jess is going to start in with these like internal narratives again and convince herself into thinking that this connection with Barnett meant more than it really did. And obviously the fact that Barnett turned around and said that he would marry her tomorrow isn't going to help with that kind of thinking. See what I mean when I said that I am a Jess apologist? I'm not even sorry. As a response to this, Jess starts to pick holes in her relationship with Mark. I don't know whether she's doing this subconsciously or not, but literally every little thing that could be wrong with their relationship, she's questioning him about it. The age difference is something that she really tries to cling on to, and she desperately wants somebody else to point out that there's quite a big age difference between them, but no one cares. His family doesn't care, her friends don't care, nobody cares, and eventually she has to just drop it as a point. Mark won't let her do this. He literally has a counter argument to her every nitpick, because on meeting the other guys, Mark's stubbornness, Mark's jealousy raises its ugly head again, because all the other men are talking about how they've been banging their girls all the whole week they've been together or whatever. And Jess actually turned around to Mark on the first night and said that she doesn't want to take things too quickly, and that, you know, she doesn't want to go to that physical police yet. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, and I think that these people haven't known each other very long and they've only just met each other physically, so I think that to rush any kind of sexual situation would be a bad move. And yeah, maybe Jess is using this as an excuse not to have sex with Mark because she's not actually attracted to him. We can't know that, and either way, if she's saying no, there's nothing we can do about it, okay? But Mark, like, is really upset about it, and like, he does try to like push Jessica into believing that this relationship is perfect and nothing could possibly go wrong, and it means that he's not actually facing any of the issues that the relationship is having, and he's not making Jessica feel very heard either, which is only going to push her further away. So this relationship was doomed from the fucking start, and it's only gotten worse and worse. One thing that I did find really funny about this like stage of the proceedings was that there was this other couple on the show called Gigi and Damien, and they were like having trouble communicating with each other. And then one day he was in the bedroom and she was in the kitchen, and there was like a wall between them, and they ended up just spilling their guts on all of this situation and their feelings about it. And I just thought it was really funny that they couldn't communicate until there was a wall between them again, like there was in the pods, and then all of a sudden they felt like they could emote with each other again. I just thought that was an interesting psychological note about this series. Similarly, Mark, in an attempt to try and reconnect with Jessica and to rekindle their relationship, not a good sign when you've only been seeing each other a couple of weeks, by the way, he sets up a romantic dinner on either side of a wall, like they're in the pods again, and uses it as an opportunity to ask Jessica some personal questions and to make her feel heard and attended to. And I think that was actually kind of a really good response to the problems that they were having. So maybe he did get the message a little bit beyond all the stubbornness and jealousy. So I suppose one thing that I do have to mention is the fact that once Barnett has chosen Amber, he does not waver in this choice, even though, as the series goes on, Jessica keeps getting drunk and flinging herself at him. And, you know, he could very easily have turned around and had a go of Jessica as well, I guess, is what I'm saying. And he chose not to do that. He doesn't even think about it, as far as we can tell. And he actually, later on in the show, takes the chance to sit down with Jessica and to air out this part of the relationship and to put a full stop on it, so that the whole getting drunk and flinging yourself at him shit doesn't happen again. And it is, we have to respect Barnett for the fact that he does not waver in his choice, and that once he has made a commitment, he sticks to that commitment despite the fact that he was a bit of a fuckboy in the pod. And Barnett is an example of a point that I will get into a little bit later in this video. And this is why I said that I was going to talk about why love isn't real at the beginning of the show, because I think that any of these almost couples probably would have gone on to work exactly the same as any of the couples that, you know, did get engaged. Anyone with a certain amount of chemistry could go on to have a successful relationship if they are both just continuing to be willing to work on it, right? So Barnett and Jessica probably would have worked, okay, just as well as Barnett and Amber would have worked, or Barnett and that other girl he was speaking to. But because Barnett continues to make the choice for Amber, that's what makes it real love, right? And as far as I can tell, those two are still married, and those are still making the choice for each other every day. And so that's kind of the cutest thing you're gonna get out of this video, because all the rest of these relationships are a fucking mess. We're not here to talk about that though. We're here to talk about Jess and Mark fucking each other's lives up for a little bit longer, to the point where the girls are trying on wedding dresses. And I think that a trope that we see throughout this series is that the dresses for the women make it real. So when they get to try on the dress and they see themselves in that bridal attire in the mirror, they finally look at themselves and they think, oh my god, what the fuck am I doing? I choose now to talk about this because in season 1 we get 2 such drastically different reactions to the dresses that I think it's just such a good example. So Amber, who's been putting on this air of confidence this whole time and has had an ego the size of Buckingham Palace, she turns around when she's in the dress and she starts to cry, and she finally shows a little bit of doubt and says, I'm scared that Barnett isn't going to say yes. And I find it kind of cute that we all know at this point that Barnett is 100% for Amber and there's no way he's not going to say yes. And that's finally the time when she allows herself to break down and show the doubt that she's obviously been feeling this entire time. You know, I think the story kind of played out a little bit like a book, but it's one that I would never read because I would hate both of the main characters. On the other hand, we get Jess, who sees this genuine reaction from Amber first, and we can obviously tell that it's made her think about the fact that she's not unsure about Mark, she's unsure about herself, right? And then once she gets into the dress, you can see that she looks like a bride in the dress, but she does not feel like one. And this is the point where we know that Jessica is definitely not going to say yes to Mark, because she's looking at it and she's like, this is a forever dress. And I'm like, oh, so that is not a forever man, clearly. I think there's this moment for guys as much as there is for the girls. Like, the girls get to see themselves in the dress and realize that this isn't just like playing pretend anymore. This is actually them being in the wedding situation, right? Because the dress is the symbol, right? It's the thing that they've all been looking forward to since they were 5 years old and they first imagined themselves getting married to Justin Bieber or whatever. There isn't this moment for the boys. Boys get suited up all the time for all sorts of occasions. I think that the moment that the boys must experience this same moment of like realization and reality must be when they're standing at the altar and they see the girl in the dress for the first time. So I think it must be a lot scarier for the guys. And I think me saying that actually kind of excuses some of the guys' last minute decisions at the altar, but I'm not going to acknowledge that. Oh fuck. I've lost my angle now, look at it. Oh well, it ends exactly how you think it would end anyway, with the Barnett and Amber ending up happily ever after and Jess and Mark going their separate ways. But I think the important thing that we need to talk about here is the fact that Jess gets labelled the villain a lot when it was actually the men's jealousy and possessiveness that got everyone into this situation in the first place. You know, I think it's because Jess went on to exhibit a lot of cringe behaviour when Barnett and herself were already engaged. You know, Jess came here to find love and to get married, and she believed in a bond that Barnett tricked her into thinking was there because he was too proud to let Jessica go and just be with a guy who genuinely liked her instead of, you know, fucking about with a guy who had 2 other women on the go at the same time. I mean, what would you do? So that was season 1. I enjoyed it. It was okay. I think that Gigi and Damien were a really cute couple. I didn't really talk about them too much. They were both a little bit crazy, and like Damien's proposal was completely out of pocket and didn't make any sense. And when he started crying during it, I just burst out laughing because I was like, I have no idea what's going on right now. I'm so glad he's not proposing to me. They just matched each other's weird, kooky, chaotic, crazy energy, and I thought that was really cute, and I was rooting for them to stay together at the end, but they didn't. I think that they went on to like date on and off. Not sure what they're up to at the minute, couldn't tell you. Barnett and Amber remain one of the only couples to date that have, you know, got together on the show and remained together throughout the entire time. So, you know, 1 out of God knows how many ain't bad. I'm going to introduce the main players in season 2. Start with Shane. I think Shane might be my personal favourite. Shane's absolutely insane. Got the craziest laugh I've ever heard in my life. Again, we have here what you might call a little bit of a playboy. Really just not good at communicating and expressing his emotions. Later, when he gets into a relationship, we see that he like storms off all the time and doesn't actually sit down and take the time to talk through his problems. So that's an issue. There's Nat, who's very sweet and I really like her. She seems like a really nice girl. Her issue that she'll run into is that she likes to tease her partner. She likes a relationship with a little bit of banter. And the guy that she ends up with does not enjoy this. That is not what he's about. And so they end up experiencing, you know, a bit of friction because of that. Next is Shayna, definitely the villain of this season. And unlike Jess, I will not be doing any apologizing for Shayna whatsoever. I think she was a really disingenuous character on this season, and we'll get into why a little bit later. So Shake and Deeps, who are a couple that I will talk about a little bit later on, for now, know that basically Shake came on the show, and even though this is supposed to be Love is Blind, where you don't find out what the other person looks like, he would ask questions in the pod that specifically pertain to like appearance, so he could like glean what these girls look like before he decided to propose to anyone. And specifically, I think the thing that pissed people off the most was that he was asking questions that pertain to weight, like would I have trouble lifting you on my shoulders at a concert and stuff like that. Just stuff that didn't really endear Shake to the audience very much. On the other hand, Deep T, she seemed like a very nice girl, and these two actually ended up together despite her being an absolute sweetheart and him being hated on sight by everybody watching the show. We'll get into their relationship a little bit later, but first I want to talk to you about Jarrette. Jarrette had a little bit of a love triangle in the pods. He was stuck between two girls, Mal and Ayana, I think. Jarrette made his decision and he decided he was going to propose to Mal. But then when he actually sat down with Mal and asked her, you know, what she would think of marrying him, she had actually decided to move things forward with this other guy that she was speaking to, okay? And they had their whole relationship going on that had its own issues. The interesting thing for me is that Jarrette, the guy, after proposing to Mal and basically getting rejected, turned around and went and proposed to basically his second choice girl, Ayana. Fuck. This girl had been really set on him, and it like really upset her that he basically turned around and said, oh, I've been rejected by this other girl, so do you want to get married? And I think that's perfectly valid. Like, the thing that I said at the time was, when the children like ask how they got together and they say, oh, let's show them the show, like, how do you think your daughter, for example, would feel about the fact that you were essentially her dad's second choice, and that if it was up to him, he'd be with a completely different woman right now? I just don't think it looks very well, and it definitely didn't play very well to audiences, as far as I can tell. The interesting thing is that Jarrette and Ayala went on to have like one of the happiest relationships past the pod, despite one little wobble at the beginning when Jarrette and Mal first saw each other. Jarrette, much like Barnett in the season before him, did not waver in his decision. It's like, we can say what we want about how their relationship came to be, but it seemed to work for them at the time. Jarrette was perfectly happy despite having his second choice woman and being able to see his first choice woman being with another guy. Is into this theory that I have that the relationships between any of the couples that had chemistry would have worked out in the end. Very recently, Jarrette and his wife, whatever her name is, I'm so sorry, that's so sexist of me, they are getting a divorce. I have no idea why, but that's what I've heard. And so they are no longer one of the happy couples that have lasted beyond the show. They lasted a lot longer than some of the couples that were each other's first choice. So I think that somewhat proves my point a little bit now. So let's get to the main meat of the season 2 matter, right? And that's the Shane, Nat, and Shayna love triangle. Shane is talking to both of these women and he doesn't know where his head is at. He and Natalie have a very emotional connection, whereas him and Shayna have this more like flirty sexual relationship. It seems to be really hard for Shane to choose between these two, even though for most of us I think there would be an obvious pick if we were going to talk about a marriage situation. Shane ends up saying the wrong name on one of the pod dates when they first come in, and so she gets called Shayna, and that like makes her feel all insecure and stuff. They end up having like a little argument, and Shane decides to overcorrect himself, and I have seen the reunion to this show too, and Shane basically confirms this, is like he overcorrects himself in his relationship with Natalie by turning around and saying, do you want to be my girlfriend? Barnett's situation again, because literally 2 minutes later he's sitting across the pod from Shayna asking her what she's wearing and if she's wearing a cute little tank top today. And I'm like, you've literally just asked another girl to be your girlfriend. Shane's argument for this is that they're in the pods to date around and he's, you know, supposed to be doing this, and Natalie knows that he's speaking to Shayna. But again, let's think about context. Like, yes, when you weren't in a literal committed relationship with anyone and you were single and in the pods, that was your intention. Now you have progressed a relationship with one of these girls, and the only appropriate thing left to do is to cut it off with Shayna. You've chosen not to do that. You've chosen not only to go in there and continue the relationship, but to continue the relationship in a gratuitously sexual manner that just seems mad disrespectful, my guy. And I was really disappointed in Shane here, because despite everything that I had heard about him, I found myself liking him anyway, just because he was so fucking weird. So it was a really disappointing moment for me, and it raises an interesting question about whether fuckboy behavior is allowed in the pods, because obviously we can look down at people like Barnett, who have, you know, several relationships going on and are forming these deep connections with several women, but that is the nature of the experiment, right? You're going in there to find presumably a soulmate for the rest of your life. You don't want to focus in on the first person that you make a snap connection with and miss out on somebody who you could really form an emotional connection with later on, because they or you were shy, or maybe you got off on the wrong foot, or it just kind of took you a little while to get there. Maybe it wouldn't be called fuckboy behavior in the pods, but I think that in general people aren't looked down upon for having these love triangle, love quadrilateral situations. I think that once one party moves one relationship into like an upper sphere, when the words girlfriend or God forbid fiance, marriage is used, that kind of takes it into a new plane. Okay, just as it would in the real world. Like if I turned around to a guy that I'm casually dating tomorrow and called him my boyfriend, you know, he would not expect me to turn around the next day and go to the club and pick up some guy. Okay, that's just not the way that the world works. And I don't understand why some of these guys seem to think that it doesn't work that way just because you're in the pods and you can have a girlfriend and just keep speaking to another girl. That's just not how it works, Shane, anywhere, I don't think. So sorry about that. Shayna, to her credit, does not allow him to continue with this sexual conversation, and she says, listen, I've heard from Natalie that she's your girlfriend now and I don't feel comfortable continuing with this relationship. And Shane turns around and he's like, why does that matter? Just continuing the blatant disrespect and, you know, just letting us all in on the fact that he only asked Nat to be his girlfriend so that she wouldn't be mad at him anymore, because like he thought that that's what she wanted to hear and he wanted to placate her in some way. I don't know. This is only just coming to me now, but maybe Shane knew that he was going to choose Natalie the entire time because the connection was more emotional, but he wanted to carry on that flirtatious sexual relationship with Shayna, because I can imagine that the, you know, being surrounded by other guys all the time and only being able to speak to women through a speaker in a wall is quite a frustrating situation, if you catch my drift. Might have been nice for him to have these kind of almost like radio sex conversations with Shayna. I said to Shayna's credit earlier, but then Shayna does a 180 and turns around right as Shane is about to propose to Natalie and tells him that she still has feelings for him. And Shane wavers a little bit, but seeing as he came into the pod to propose to Natalie that day, he kind of stands his ground and says, listen, it's too late now, there's nothing we can do. Shayna this entire time has been speaking to another guy, and this other guy decides to propose to her. This guy is Kyle. He seems like a really, really nice guy. You can tell when he proposes to Shayna that she does not want to say yes. They have this one fundamental difference that I will get into a little bit later that is obviously a big deal to Shayna, even if it isn't as much of a big deal to Kyle. And that, plus the fact that she obviously felt like she had this deeper connection with Shane, you know, that makes her not want to say yes to him. We can see it blatantly on her face, and yet she does anyway. And so this raises another question. I'm full of questions today. And that is, did Shayna just want to stay on the show? It's like I said earlier, you know that if you don't get engaged, you're not going to stay on the show. And she knew that Shane was probably going to get engaged to Natalie. And, you know, maybe she wanted to see Shane, maybe she wanted to engineer a way to get to Shane so that she could have her chance for them to see each other, for him to realize that she was the one for him at the end of the day. So this fundamental difference that Shayna and Kyle have is essentially that Shayna is this really devout Christian and Kyle's an atheist. It sounds ridiculous to me too, but people like Kyle and I could never understand because we just don't have faith. So that's why it's not a big deal to us. But, you know, as somebody who has experienced that feeling of blind faith, it is a big deal to Shayna. So it's not something that we can question. However, Shayna is making this the big deal to Kyle while simultaneously being in the interviews with, you know, the little camera crew, telling us that it's all about the fact that she can't stop thinking about Shane. And at first I was really intrigued about the fact that she couldn't stop thinking about Shane despite the fact that she'd never seen him and she was here in this physical relationship with Kyle, at least for a little bit, until she abandoned him on the honeymoons, by the way. Then I realised that, of course, Shayna, she's not averse to spinning herself these internal narratives about love. And we all know that it's so much easier to love the idea of a person than the reality of a person. And so Shayna was more in love with the fantasy of Shane than the reality of Kyle, because Kyle was there in front of her. And when the screen door opened so she could see Kyle for the first time, she literally winced. Go back and watch it. She makes a face. She's not attracted to that man. So in her head, she's probably been idolizing this connection that she had with Shane in the same way that Jessica did with Barnett, right? And it's become this big romantic thing in her head. Leaves Kyle on the honeymoon, and when everybody comes back to real life, she takes the opportunity to go and infiltrate herself into the group. She makes a beeline for Shane, and Shane goes off to have this conversation with her, even though his fiance Natalie is clearly not very comfortable with it. Shane and Shayna end up having this like deep conversation, and it's really weird because this is the first time they've seen each other, and yet they just fall into step beside each other like they're all friends. And it's interesting to me because this is a little theme that we will see throughout, that the almost couples, when they meet for the first time, do also, you know, still have this bond that they made in the pods and this weird connection that any of us who have not been through this experience won't understand. And I will use this information once I finish this video to defend Jessica even further, even though we're not talking about season 1 anymore. So I just wanted to warn you about that. Shane and Shayna have this little conversation, and we see more of the little internal narratives that Shayna has been telling herself, in the fact that she comes over and starts trying to tell Shane about his relationship with Natalie, even though she can have no idea about it, especially because she's now missed out on another like 1 or 2 weeks of them being in Mexico or wherever they fucking send them to. She has no idea how their relationship has progressed, and yet she's here trying to tell him that they're not compatible just because of her speaking to him through a wall and her living with Natalie for a couple of weeks. Yes, before her, she's built up this connection in her head into something bigger than it was, and she thinks that Shane is going to look at her and realize that she's right and run away with her. But obviously Shane has been living in the relationship with Natalie. It's not this thing that he's only heard about like it is with Shayna. So he's like invested in this relationship now, and so this experience actually brings him further away from Shayna and closer to Natalie, because he obviously goes back to Natalie and tells her what Shayna said, and they have this little bonding moment where they say, actually, I do think we're compatible and I think she's an idiot. So everything that Shayna did just felt like she was trying to stir the pot, and I don't know whether the producers were pushing her to do this or whether she was doing it for herself, and she maybe was only doing all of these things to stay relevant on the show and to like grow her social platform or whatever it is people are trying to do when they go on these types of things. I was just really offended by Shayna. I just didn't like the way that she tried to insert herself into their relationship when she had no idea about it. And I didn't like the way that she lied to Kyle and like basically led him on. And you know, like they said they were going to compromise about the God thing, and then when she realized that things weren't going to work out with her and Shane, she just kind of dropped Kyle as well, like he meant nothing. And I thought that was really mean because he seemed like a really genuine guy. The thing that really bugged me personally about Nat and Shane was the fact that Nat just kept trying to have a laugh with Shane and like have a little bit of banter with him. And anytime that she made any kind of quip against him, he would immediately just fly off the handle and be like, stop taking the mick out of me. Like, sometimes you need to be serious. And then he'd like turn around and be like, why don't you boast about our relationship? Like, it just seemed like he wanted this really like cringy relationship that is just not realistic. Am I right? Do people like that really exist? I'm gonna come at you with a hot take here and tell you that I did not find Shake that abrasive. It's really weird because obviously when he first came into the pods I absolutely hated him for the same reasons that everybody else did, but then there seemed to be like this genuine change going on with him. I don't know, maybe we thought that Deep T was the one who was helping him to overcome his shallowness or whatever. And those two get engaged and they see each other for the first time. And I shit you not, them meeting for the first time was like the most uncomfortable thing that I watched on the entire show because you could feel like the sexual tension between them. Like I could feel how I could feel how horny Shake was, okay? That's the only way to describe it, I'm sorry. It's really weird to me how this whole thing played out after that. And then I was thinking about it a little bit more and I was like, okay, so it was frustrating for Shane and he wanted to have these phone sex conversations with Shayna, but like Shake hadn't been having those phone sex conversations with anyone. And Deep T was the first woman that he'd seen in weeks, presumably. So, you know, maybe he was just really excited to see a woman again. Maybe it felt like the first time. Maybe it really wouldn't have mattered what she looked like in that moment. Not for Shake. Defending him in any way, shape or form, I don't think that that is an acceptable way to think or behave. However, I do think it's really funny. I did see this change coming over Shake and he did apologise for his behaviour early on and it seemed genuine as far as I could tell. It came out a little bit further down the line that he just didn't feel like he was attracted to her. And you know what? That's something that he can't help. It's just like Jess and Mark in the first season. If you're not attracted to somebody, that's fine. Nobody's asking you to be. But like there were so many moments when Shake had the opportunity to say this and he didn't take it. Like Deep T would be talking about how she can't wait to get married and should they just quit the show and get married tomorrow? And he'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, oh my god, dude, like if you were going to fake it, like please can you at least fake it convincingly? The way that the show was edited, it was like, it kind of felt as an audience member that Deep T had no idea what was going on. And Shake had just been going around to all the other cast members telling them about how he wasn't attracted to her and she looked like his auntie and stuff like that. Obviously she did have an idea what was going on because at the end of the series, thank God, she decides not to marry him. Again, after she leaves him at the altar, I was like a little bit confused because I feel like he was going to say yes to her. There's something about Shake, man, I don't know, like I feel like his own pride got in the way, his own doubt got in the way. Maybe he was really attracted to Deep T and he just didn't know how to take it because, like he said, he'd only ever been attracted to white blonde girls before, which, I mean, yeah, that was a whole fucking issue in itself, don't get me wrong. I am not going to speak to this one. Yous can have that. I just didn't find him that abrasive. I feel like he was more comparable to Jess in a way, in that maybe he wanted to believe that he was changing, or maybe he really was changing and then he kind of took a step back in his healing process or whatever. There was a genuine nature to Shake, even in the reunion when he's fully embraced the fact that he became the male villain of this series and that everybody fucking hated him. Strongly stood behind everything that he said. I don't know, like the fact that he was willing to go up and say all these completely asinine, stupid fucking things in front of such a large quantity of people makes me think that, like, why would the stuff that he said in the pods not be genuine, right? Like, is he even capable of not being genuine to himself in that way if the person who he is usually so hated by people and he's still willing to be that anyway? Am I making sense? Anyway, hot take, I just wasn't as offended by Shake as I was by some of the season 3 guys. Let me tell you, the season 3 guys are something fucking else. All right, should we talk about it? Okay, so the season 3 main players. I will introduce you to Zanab. Okay, I liked Zanab when I was watching the show. I identified with her as a difficult woman, possibly with heavy Virgo placements, who is very naggy as part of their love language. I swear I am only trying to improve you as a person. I don't mean to sound like your mother. Zanab had to grow up at a very young age. She unfortunately lost her parents, and that made her have to take on a lot of responsibility in life. And as such, she hasn't got a lot of time for silliness and playing. Unfortunately, Zanab ends up matching with this guy called Cole. Cole is very silly, not very mature, the kind of guy who has Nerf guns in random kitchen cabinets. Cole also just screamed cheater to me when he came on this show. I did not know what he was doing here. I'm on the fence about whether he did display cheating behavior on the show or not. I will leave that up to yourselves to decide. The thing about Zanab and Cole is that it is such like a complicated relationship that has so many layers to it. We will talk about them a little bit later. Next is Bartise. I do not like Bartise in the slightest. There is not one little redeeming quality about him at all. At least Cole I found entertaining to watch. Bartise, I just like hated with every fiber of my being. He was really disingenuous. He came on the show and he was a lot younger than the other guys, and a lot of the girls, you know, they didn't vibe with that. They thought, you're not going to be able to take this seriously. He really took umbrage with that. He was like, I'm going to prove to everyone that just because I'm young doesn't mean that I'm going to be a player and I'm not going to take this seriously. And then he completely fucked that up, as you'll see. The girl that he ended up with is Nancy, who is this really sweet and genuine girl who I absolutely love and also think is absolutely gorgeous, which is relevant to the story, I assure you. It's not that I don't think any of the other girls are good looking, it's just that there's a particular nitpick when it comes to Nancy that I must discuss with you. My only issue with Nancy is that she is like the definition of Love is Blind. She's the poster girl for this fucking show, right? Because the second that she decides on Bartise that she is gonna marry Bartise, there is no swaying that girl. He could murder her entire family in front of her, and I really just don't think that there would be an issue. And it fully takes him, spoiler alert, saying no to her at the altar for her to realize that there is even an issue in their relationship, mate. It's completely ridiculous. Final couple that I will be discussing is Colleen and Matt. Oh god, Colleen, very sweet, very normal girl, not very noteworthy, not in like a bad way, just in like she didn't have as big a personality when compared with some of the other people on the show. Her and Matt seemed like a really good couple at first. They were both kind of on the quiet side and it seemed like they were going to have this really sweet relationship. It quickly went to shit because Matt is a fucking crazy person, okay? I didn't like him from the start, okay? And I knew that it was going to be an issue because he opened up his interview with like talking about how he was married before to his childhood sweetheart and she ended up cheating on him with this other guy and getting pregnant by this other guy, right? You could tell that this was something that still really upset Matt. And not only that, it was something that still really enraged him. I could just feel the misogyny just oozing off him. And I tried to give him a chance, I really did, because I thought that their relationship was really sweet. As the season went on, it was proven that, you know, boys really should go to therapy when things like this happen, because otherwise they just end up taking their anger out on the entire female race, and that's not good. He had all of this unresolved trauma that ended up impacting his relationship with Colleen because she couldn't like move or breathe or be approached by another man or be in the vicinity of another man without Matt completely freaking out. Like, you can tell that their relationship was going to be this whole thing of her having to be home at a certain time, or there was going to be an argument, and him being able to check her phone, or there was going to be an argument. And even if she did everything right, Matt would find some discrepancy in what she'd done to pick apart, and 5 minutes where she wasn't accounted for, where she could have been getting bummed or whatever, I don't know. Clearly not speaking from experience, just this is what I imagine an abusive relationship would be like, okay? And I don't even want to say that this is me saying, like, I don't want to speculate. Like, did anyone watch the reunion show for season 3 when they were talking about the whole Colleen situation? Very strange. Yeah, because there is another fucking love square going on here, and it's that Zanab and Cole are speaking, and Cole and Colleen are speaking, and Colleen is obviously also speaking to Matt. I find it weird that, like, the love triangle in the last season was between Shane and Shayna, and this one is between Cole and Colleen. I'm taking this necklace off, it's driving me wild. Cole ends up choosing Zanab because, similarly to Shane, similarly to Jessica, he chooses the person with which he has more of an emotional connection as opposed to a flirty sexual one, okay? Him and Zanab get deep, and when he chases Colleen up about this and says, hey, do you think we could maybe try and talk about some deeper topics, try and get to know each other on that level? Colleen says, I'm just not really that type of person, and I don't feel like I have to do that, force that with you in order to know if we should have a relationship or not, and I think that's perfectly fair. So Cole turns around and says, okay, well, I don't want to pursue a relationship with someone who doesn't want to get deep with me. Also perfectly respectable. So he turns around and kind of ends up with Zanab, to put it in a not very graceful manner. But Colleen obviously turns around and gets with Matt, who she has gotten deep with in a certain way. And so that's how we kind of sussed out that these were the relationships that were going to arise from this whole situation, okay? The real issue that everybody has with season 3 is that the second that the couples got to meet everybody else, the boys started popping off about how much they fancied people that they weren't engaged to. And, you know, as we saw with Shane, once the relationship is established and elevated to the point beyond the pods, that is the point where it becomes completely unacceptable, as it would in normal society if you were engaged to someone, to be having these flirtationships with the other cast members, okay? You're all engaged, guys. Is it really that hard to understand? It's no longer a dating show. It's a reality show about your engagement. Get it together. Cole sees Colleen for the first time, and she is very much his type. We've seen this before. We know what's about to happen. He has to go over there and tell her about how she's his type. I don't know what these men are expecting to happen once they've revealed this. Like, do they think that an emotional connection is going to form between them, that it's going to be any stronger than it was in the pods just because they've now seen that this girl's got a fucking tight ass or whatever? Like, I don't know what internal narrative that is. I can't possibly speak to that. I'm sure there is one, but there's no way my mind is capable of those mental gymnastics, okay? Cole and Colleen have a little bit of a conversation and essentially say, yeah, in the real world, I probably would have gone for you, but hey ho, that's not what's happened here. I think it was more of a flirty conversation on Cole's end. Obviously editing maybe isn't on his side there, but this is just what I saw. That is all I can tell you. It's definitely kind of an inappropriate conversation to be having when the pair of you have fiancés anyway, but even that is a debatable concept in this entire conversation, so we'll just move along. This is the first instance where Matt blows up at Colleen because he hears about it, and essentially he's willing to call off the entire relationship just for Colleen admitting to another man that in another life she might have found him attractive. And what did I say? The two of them actually like full on go on to get married, and they're still together at the reunion, and you can just tell that they bring this situation up at the reunion and it is so fucking uncomfortable. Like Colleen nearly cries and she's sitting next to him on the couch like this, and he's sitting with his arm around her and he's completely blocking her off from the view of all the other male contestants, which Like, it's just this horrible, predatory, like, possessive behavior that really doesn't sit right with me as a person who has never been through that. There's this point as well where Colleen goes to the club and, you know, Matt's expecting her to come home and she's like late or whatever, freaking out and threatening to leave again, as seems to be his like motif. Actually, the thing that makes him calm down about the situation is actually from, I'm pretty sure, having a conversation with Cole about it and getting confirmation from Cole that there was nothing going on and that Colleen wasn't doing anything wrong. And it speaks volumes to me that Colleen has been insisting for weeks that she didn't do anything wrong in that conversation, and Matt is completely unwilling to believe her. And yet the second Cole sits down and says, oh no, Colleen didn't do anything wrong, Matt is like, oh, okay, my guy, yeah, that sounds perfectly fine by me. Like, he's perfectly willing to believe another man's opinion on the matter, but not his wife's. I've got a lot of unresolved hatred towards women for what happened to him in the past, and that's not fine, and you need to go and get therapy. Another person who has second thoughts when he sees one of the other couples is Bartise. He had what we'll call a connection with Raven, this other girl in the pods. And by a connection, I mean that, like, literally they were both like, I like to work out. And then that's the only thing they talked about. Raven was not remotely bothered when Bartise broke it off to get with Nancy. And Raven is very happily with SK as of the situation that I am speaking about. Bartise sees Raven and he's very, very attracted to her. He likes like a fit girl, like a gym girl. And Nancy is kind of like, she's short and like curvaceous. She's got like this, like what I think is very attractive body type, but apparently Bartise has a big issue with. He goes over and starts to compliment Raven, and Raven calls him out immediately. She's like, you didn't have any compliments for Pod, Raven, so I find it very disingenuous that you have a lot of nice things to say to me now, just based on how I look. Bartise is way too focused on the physical, and this all comes to a head in this ridiculous argument that he has with Nancy, who I did mention in the beginning, I think is this really attractive girl. And between you and me right now, girls, okay, I would never say that Bartise is not attractive, but to me personally, really, really not my type, really average looking male. As somebody who found Nancy really attractive, this argument was just so completely bizarre to me, because Bartise literally screams, looks matter, okay, into Nancy's face, as if she's this fucking gremlin, goblin, witch, horrible, fucking mangled, disgusting creature. And she's like expecting him to love her when no man ever would, because she's so hideous. And it's like, she's just, even if you do, she's not your personal type. Like, it's not like she's this perfectly like normal looking woman. There's no need to like vilify her for the way that she looks, because that's essentially what you're doing by screaming in her face, looks matter. She can't help it if you're not attracted to her. Like, you need to break it off. That's not her responsibility to make you attracted to her. What are you doing? Bartise. Anyway, I didn't like Bartise very much. Basically, I've been filming the Valentine's Day video over the last couple of days, but it is currently 2:30 in the morning of Valentine's Day and I've not yet finished it. So I've invited you out to the garage where I've now got an electric blanket, and we're gonna fucking smash through the last bit of these notes, because I actually have some really poignant things to say that I would like to share with you. Finish up on Bartise and Nancy. That I said at the beginning of the video is that the contestants on season 1 of Love is Blind seemed very genuine, and they all seemed like they were there to find love, to find someone that they would be happy with for the rest of their lives, blah, blah, blah. I think that by the time we have gotten to season 3 here, that is really not the case. People are aware of the fame that you can get from being on the show, or aware that it's like a lucrative career choice to be on this show, all right? Whether you are a lovey-dovey couple who turns out happily ever after, or whether you are a contestant like Shake, who has got a podcast based on the views that he expressed on the show. And I went to do some exercise the other day, and I was like, oh, like a new Pilates video was like popped up in my suggested, and it was fucking Raven. Same as with any other like dating reality show, it is a chance to gain clout for some people. It's really hard for me to believe that Bartise came into this experiment wanting to find love, and the only other conclusion I can come to is that he came for the clout. I don't know. To be like not interested in Nancy from the offset. All of the times that he decided to stay with her just seemed really disingenuous. Just seemed like it was his excuse to continue being on the show. Because there really were no redeeming qualities about this relationship, especially from his side, where he was saying that he wasn't even attracted to her in the first place. I've not got anything analytical to say about Bartise and Nancy's relationship. It just really angered me because I feel like Nancy really did nothing to like deserve any of this. The way that Bartise went about it just really felt like he was berating her for looking the way that she does, something that she can't help. Like, what does he want her to do, get plastic surgery or something? And I know that if you ask Bartise, he would never, you know, say that he was trying to say that. I just don't think he thought about the implications of what he was saying and the way that what he was saying might make Nancy feel. He chose to go to Raven and like talk about how their connection was so strong in the pods and blah blah blah, when even like Raven admitted that the only thing they had in common was that they both like the gym. Speaks to the fact that Bartise was not ready for an adult relationship, and in fact probably doesn't even know what an adult relationship is. I'm gonna close off this series by talking about Cole and Zanab. I'm not sure what's gonna come out here, okay? I watched the series myself and I had my opinions. You know, I liked Zanab. I didn't like Cole at all. I thought that he was exactly the type of boy that I would hate to even have to go on one date with, never mind to have to get married to. And possibly, you know, this initial impression skewed my view of things, because on watching a couple of other people's thoughts on the series and, you know, seeing a couple of clips from the reunion and stuff like that, I think that the Cole and Zanab situation is a situation that needs looking at in a lot more depth. And I'm not saying I'm the one who's going to be doing it, but I'm ready to start the conversation here, okay? Cole was in the same situation as Bartise, especially after he saw Colleen. He was all of a sudden like talking about how the physical attraction wasn't there with Zanab, she wasn't his usual type, etc, etc. Now, I wouldn't be any type of feminist if I didn't point out the following, and that's that when a woman has been in these similar situations, just because she hasn't like outright admitted that the attraction is the problem, we've kind of let them get on with it and slide under the radar a little bit, and we like really vilify the men for not being attracted to the women that they're engaged to. And at the end of the day, we can't force someone to be attracted to somebody else. That's just not the way the world works. Otherwise there would be no drama on this show whatsoever. Boys like Shake and Bartise, even Cole, get the flack from women, because I think still a big chunk of this audience is women, and the things that the men are saying to the women on the show can tap into these insecurities that we all have as women, with the skewing of the viewing of these people as romantic partners as opposed to just contestants on a reality show. That can make us feel like these comments were directed at us. They can, you know, make us feel like our own insecurities are being challenged here. Saying, of course, is that Cole and even Bartise implying that these women are not attractive is obviously going to set off alarm bells in any woman's head. We've been trained to want to be attractive. That's just the way the world works. So when we see these really attractive young singles getting called ugly by these men who have supposedly fallen in love with their personalities, we can't help but probably feel that our own bodies and looks are being attacked, considering ourselves a lot lesser than these women, as women are wont to do. And that's the problem with Zanab and Cole. See, Zanab was mothering Cole and she was very nitpicky and naggy. She's a very insecure person, and Cole did not pick up on this, and Cole chose to be honest about the fact that he was having physical feelings for somebody else, and that was just not the way to go in a relationship with Zanab. As much as Cole turned out to be like sorry for this, and he did honestly, in my opinion, tried to make up for it and was never the evil guy that Zanab tried to make him out to be toward the end of the series. It was too late. It was Zanab's insecurities had taken root inside her brain, and there was kind of nothing either of them could do at that point to save the relationship. Or at least, I don't think there was anything Cole could have done. If Zanab had have realised what she was doing, maybe she would have taken the necessary steps. But unfortunately, I don't think she does realise, because as we saw on the reunion, you know, Cole broke down into tears and Zanab was just like, I forgive you though. I found that really, it was almost mean in a way. Like, I feel like maybe she probably thought she was getting some kind of revenge on him, and like maybe she was like justified in like having him cry to her on national TV. She probably felt embarrassed and all this about the fact that she'd basically been pied. We can't make someone be attracted to us, and if Cole's worst crime was just not fancying someone who's not his type, then we're all very guilty of that on the regs, I think. Another thing with the whole Zanab situation is that, you know, since she's like a naggy woman or whatever, there is this whole idea of for every one man's like annoying female, there's another man's where have you been all my life, right? No matter how difficult you are as a woman, how spiky you are as a female, how hard you make it for a man to love you, there's always going to be a man out there who like perfectly tolerates your difficultness. And this is even something that goes back to romantic comedies. I see it all the time in books, especially like books about like feminist women, which I'm like, it's this difficult woman trope. Like she either like doesn't believe in love, or she's like super uptight and only into a job. She's socially awkward, or a geek, or a supernatural creature that comes along and he is so accepting of the way that she is, whereas everybody else was like, oh, you have to change or a man's never going to love you. That even though she's apparently not bothered about having a man love her, she's eventually won over by him because he's just so accepting of her as she is, as her natural self. It's like such an overdone trope, and yet here we all are thinking that one day somebody's going to come along and just accept Zanab as she is, and Zanab's never going to have to work on herself or like improve on her nagging because one guy might not mind it. Is it fair of us to spin these internal narratives about ourselves as difficult women that one day a man will just tolerate us? I don't think so. And even if a man is willing to tolerate us and all our difficulties, should we let him? We have a responsibility to ourselves. We owe it to ourselves to try to become better people. And if we're stuck in a stagnant relationship where the other person never challenges us to be a better version of ourselves, and let's be honest, a version of ourselves that nags less is going to be like a less stressed version of ourselves, a more liked version of ourselves, what would be the point in being in that relationship? And this was a deep thought for me, okay? Like with the Shane and Shayna thing, where she was like more in love with the fantasy of Shane than the reality of Kyle. It was like, oh my God, have you ever been in a relationship where like you can't wait for them to like get home or to like come over? And then as soon as you actually see each other, all you do is argue and it's shit. And it's like, oh my God, like all those times that I was doing that, it was because I was in love with the idea of having somebody there, having somebody to come home to or to come home to me, and not with the actual person who was doing that. Just a little bit of introspection about anything, you just find out some really deep and painful truths about yourself, my guy. Sometimes it ain't good. It's all therapy, and it's free. As much as it may be women's insecurities that have caused Cole to become such a villain on this season, I do think we do have to address the fact that the racial undertones of this entire thing made it so much fucking worse. Cole, like Shake, was like, oh, I'm usually into blonde white girls. Cole saying that as a white guy has its own implication. He was talking about the way she looked and he was like, I married a girl called Zanab. And like the way he said it, like it was an insult or a slur, just really rubbed me and everybody else, it seems, up the wrong way. Definitely the way that Cole handled this situation could have been a lot better, but I do think if you go back and you really look at the way he acted, he was just trying to be himself, same as Zanab was. And they just weren't a good match, and neither of them was willing to admit it because, again, we've spun ourselves these internal narratives about it being this fucking love story and opposites attract and blah, blah, blah. And it ended up into all right people as far as I can tell anyway, getting hurt. Okay, so we have reached the end of this whole shit show of a show, and I have things to say. Primarily, this show, much like any other reality dating show, forces people to chase the idea of love as opposed to, actual love. It puts its contestants into this highly romanticized situation where they are, left to their own devices and left to spin whatever narratives they like to generate drama. Okay, Jessica chasing Barnett because he's good looking and that's what the one is supposed to be, instead of choosing to remain with the guy that she is engaged to and give that relationship the chance that it deserves, just as much as any other relationship that Jessica should decide to put herself in. We see Shayna being more obsessed with the fantasy of a person than with the reality of a person, because it's so much easier to love someone who we actually know nothing about and who we can put all these perfect ideals onto, as opposed to a real living, breathing human with flaws and maybe things that we don't like about them, who's standing right in front of us. As much as I can say that, love doesn't exist and that any of these couples would have worked out if they had happened to choose each other, the fact that they do choose, the fact that they keep choosing, that's what I think real love is. It's not a feeling, it's a choice. It's something that we continue to do every day. We could cause anyone out of our lives that we choose. It doesn't matter whether they're friends, family, lovers, whatever. We could cut anyone out at any minute. The fact that we choose not to do that is what shows our continued dedication, loyalty, love, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, there comes a point in some romantic relationships where the choice cannot continue to be made. Some people are just not compatible past a certain point, and I think that's okay. But let's try not to let these internal narratives that the fucking patriarchy has bestowed upon us through the medium of romantic comedies and romance books and fucking 50 Shades of Grey, let's not let all that get in the way of us making the right choices when it comes to love. Last point before I leave you is just this reiteration of the fact that we'll never know, right? I mean, we can never know what it's like to fall in love sight unseen, as they say on the fucking show all the time. And, to form these emotional connections with people who we've never seen in real life. We'll never know what this experience is like. And it's so weird because, like I said before, all the almost couples, even on first meeting, all seem to retain this connection that they've made. And they all say in the interviews that this connection they've made, even with the people they didn't choose, will last forever because it's something special that has been, manufactured on this show. We see this with like Shane and Shayna the first time they see each other, just going off to have a private conversation and it being easy as pie. Nancy and Andrew proposed to Nancy and she said no because she was going to choose Bartise. When they eventually met each other, it was like two old friends meeting, and Nancy actually ended up, unloading to him about her difficult relationship and actually shedding a few tears to this man that she'd never seen before in real life, because this connection in the pods obviously means something to these people. And that, my friends, is why I can safely conclude that Barnett definitively played Jessica, because Barnett's insistence that this connection in the pods meant nothing to him after choosing Amber. Maybe he did it for Amber's benefit, to be fair, because Amber was mad jealous of Jessica, even though Jessica never even had a look in. The point was that Jessica, everybody thought she was cringe, right? Because it was the first season and she was like getting drunk, throwing herself at Barnett and being like, listen, that connection we made in the pods was special and nobody can ever take that away from us. And everybody was like thinking that it was her like weird way of trying to weasel back into his life. But maybe she was just speaking from the heart. Maybe she did just believe that they had this deep connection that all the other couples seem to have. And the reason that we found it awkward was because that just wasn't reciprocated on Barnett's end, because his feelings were never entirely genuine. That's my conclusion anyway. I'm gonna get out of here now. I'm gonna stop defending Jessica. we'll see if a new season of Love is Blind comes out at any point in the future. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll see you next time.